No matter where you're at in your knitting journey, taking on socks can feel daunting and overwhelming, but it doesn't have to. Welcome to your Cuff Down Sock Knitting Masterclass. I'm Audrey from Fire and Fiber, and today I'm going to show you all my tips and tricks that I've learned through lots of trial and even more error. So let's get started. Okay, first and foremost, let's go through the anatomy of a knitted sock. Now, obviously, we've all worn socks before, but it's really important to understand the parts of the sock in order to know how to make them properly. So at the top, we have our cuff. As I said in the intro, we are doing a cuff down sock. Why? This is how I learned. It's my personal opinion that this is the easiest method. Although toe up socks have advantages in other ways, this is the way that I know best. First, we have our cuff. The length of your cuff and the type of ribbing you will choose depends on really personal preference more than anything else. I choose to do a 2x2 ribbing and a cuff that is typically between an inch to an inch and a half, but everyone is different. Next, we have our leg. This is pretty self-explanatory. This and the foot will be the parts of the sock that you knit the fastest, given the fact that it's just knitting in the round. If you are, as you can see, this is a basic stockinette. If you were adding any sort of texture following a different pattern or doing color work, this would take you longer, but in this instance, it's just a straight tube. The next part we have on our sock anatomy is called our heel flap. It's kind of difficult to see. Let me see if I can zoom in a little bit more. These are my socks that I wear, by the way. So if you're wondering why they look a little rough, that's why. So this is our heel flap right here. This is one area that trips a lot of knitters up because we're going from working in the round to working something flat and only working half of our stitches. So this can be confusing for some folks. Put that back nicely. The next part is our heel. This is pretty obvious. Then we have what is called the gusset. The gusset is this little line of stitching here and on the other side as well. If you look at any socks, store-bought, handmade, whatever, they'll most likely have this part. This is another part that really makes a lot of knitters nervous because what we're going to be doing is taking our heel flap that we have knit and then decreased, and we're reattaching it back to the body of the sock. So this is our gusset right here. Then the rest of the sock, we have the foot. Pretty self-explanatory. Again, like I said, this and your leg will be knit quickest unless you're adding patterning, color work in, anyways. Finally, we have our toe. There are quite a few different ways to finish off a toe and do what's called a grafting, and we will get into that. But that is what our toe looks like at the bottom. And so that is the basic anatomy of a sock, which again is really important when we get into the how-to of knitting socks. Understanding each part makes a world of difference, I promise. And just like everyone has loyalty to either Apple or Android products, knitters seem to stick with one particular style of needle once they find something that works for them, and I'm no exception. So I could get really deep into all the various styles of needles, including brands, material, things like that. But right now, I'm just going to show you the two that I use. So the first is a set of DPNs. These are from Knit Picks or Knit Pro, and they are in a size 2.25 millimeter. These are actually what I learned to knit on, and I really think there is a lot of merit in continuing to use double pointed needles. Now, I don't have a spare set of my 9-inch circulars right now, so we're going to have to just accept that I'm going to be showing you this set that my latest set of socks is on. This is my 2.25 millimeter Chagu 9-inch circular needle. Everyone on the internet seems to be obsessed with these, and there is good reason. While they are pretty cost restrictive, especially in comparison to other brands, their quality, it really does make it worth it. For me, especially when I'm knitting something like the leg or the cuff, having these makes life a lot easier. And knitting my socks goes a lot faster. The benefit to having the 9-inch circulars is that you also don't get the ladders that you would get with your DPNs. However, these can be really tough on your hands, especially if you're finding that you have carpal tunnel issues or other things like that. What you may notice about a lot of sock knitting patterns is that they will start out with advising you to cast on however many stitches in the preferred cast on method of your choosing. And I am no different. I am just going to show you my most preferred method of casting on for socks, and we will get going from there. There's lots of great blogs and articles and videos of knitters who are very experienced and can explain all the different benefits and the downsides to each technique or method. That's great. I am just going to stick with the basic knitted on method. For our socks today. I'm using a fingering weight yarn. This is a 75-25 superwash nylon combo. I'm going to be honest, I thrifted this from Value Village. I'm pretty sure it was $1.99, and it's a brand I don't recognize, I think from Europe or Germany somewhere. Whatever cast on method you choose, try to make sure that you're doing something that is stretchy, because again, socks have to go over your foot, up your heel, and up your leg. So the knitted cast on, we make a slip knot, and then we're going to yarn over, pull a stitch through, and then we're going to take our stitch that we've just made from our needle number 2 and put it back on needle number 1 and pull it taut. Because we're making a women's sock, we are going to cast on 64 stitches to start, and we'll come back after. All right, so we have our 64 stitches. We are going to transfer them over onto our DPNs, or I guess I should say our other DPNs. So as you can see here, I've fit all 64 stitches onto one, and now I need to transfer them over to be able to work in the round. Whether you use 3 or 4 DPNs is entirely personal preference. 64 is divisible by both 4 and 3, so that makes it a little bit easier. Wait, is it divisible by 4 and 3? All right. So I've cast on 64 stitches onto one of my DPNs, and now it's time to transfer them over to another 3 DPNs. So 64 is divisible by 4, meaning that each of my needles is going to have 16 stitches on it. Oftentimes when you're working in the round, whether you use 3 DPNs or 4 is entirely personal preference. But for the sake of convenience and ease, for me, I suggest 4. That way you have an even number of stitches on every single needle, especially when you're working your ribbing. So we're going to take our needles and transfer over 16 stitches onto each. And we also need to be mindful that we're not twisting our stitches. If you do, don't panic. We can fix that once we are about to join in the round. Okay, oops, not to worry about that. So we have our first 16 stitches on our first double pointed needle, and now it is time to add the next 16 onto the next needle. This looks a little bit hairy and tricky, but trust me, it's not. I'm going to take my first 16 stitches on my needle and I'm going to slide them down to the middle. Then I'm going to take my next double pointed needle, scooch in here, and collect another 16 stitches. All right, so I've transferred my second set of 16 stitches to my second DPN, and I still have my first one here, and then another 32 on this needle. I'm going to slide this guy over again, pinching my needle so that I don't get them twisted up. And then pinching back over here, I'm going to then transfer my last set of 16 stitches onto my final DPN. I've got my last set of 16 stitches on my double pointed needle. I'm going to just slide this needle over a little bit so that my stitches sit in the center of my work needle. And now I'm going to begin to join in the round. You'll see that my needles are kind of sitting in order. A lot of people get really worried about twisting their needles, twisting their stitches, getting confused. Trust me, it's not as scary as it seems. So the next thing we're going to do is join in the round. If you've never joined in the round before when you've cast on, this is a perfect time to try it. The reason we do this is to prevent any little gaps in our cuff. So what we're doing is we are taking the very first stitch and the very last stitch and we are swapping them. And the reason we do this is so that we don't have a gap in our cuff. This does not need to be as complicated or as scary as it seems. So we're going to tighten that up. And there we go. We have our stitches joined in the round. Like I said, everyone has a different preference when it comes to cuff in terms of ribbing. A lot of patterns I see indicate doing a 1x1 ribbing. I prefer a 2x2, meaning that you are going to knit 2, purl 2, knit 2, purl 2 all the way around. I'm going to do that for about an inch or an inch and a half, depending on my preference and how quickly I get bored with my sock. And then I will meet you back here. Or brand new. But try better. Experienced knit. Your toe. Welcome to your cuff down. I'm Audrey.